Hello once again, everyone, and welcome back to Fights from History, which occasionally I mess up and call Fights Through History, but that's what the actual name is. Now, today, as the title suggested, we're going over some very niche defenses from Fiore. Now, these are not first-hand accounts, but they're so distinctly niche and not necessarily random per se, but very much have that air of, this happened to me, here's what I recommend you do, that I decided to go ahead and cover them in this sort of format, and also where else was I going to cover them. So, we've got a couple different scenarios for you here, all of which, like I said, are kind of framed around self-defense, which is a lot of fun. In which case we're going to see this dagger is going to change hands rapidly, and we're going to see also asymmetrical weapons multiple times. So, for starting off with, it says if you come against a man with a spear and you are armed with a dagger. Now, Fiore doesn't necessarily say that you're already holding a staff, but you could also grab a large stick or things along those lines. Most likely, if this sort of scenario is happening, you're probably getting ambushed on a road or something along those lines. Jake here is my, not only resident Italian, but also in the fine honor of Italians, he's looking to rob me. So, he's some brigand who's on a road, I was some poor traveler, oh dear, I have my dagger in my back pocket. Now, the image shows the dagger already out. You could also perform this with the dagger then drawing it. That's not hard to do. The cover itself is what's important. You could also, alternatively, if this was just a stick on the ground, you could pick it up to try and even things out. You might even be able to dupe him into thinking that you're going to try and fight him with this like it's, a quarterstaff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my right foot forward, I'm going to put the stick on my right side to invoke him into thrusting on this open line. As he does that thrust, I'm just going to bring my stick across to defend myself. Now once I've got control of that, I'm going to step up with my left foot and just plant the dagger where I will. Relatively straightforward. This works if he thrusts both above and below. So, he goes again, block, move in. Relatively simple. Let's also look at what happens when he does it on the other side though. So, switch hands. This side, things change just a tiny bit, right? Uh-oh. Not because you want cover that way. This way doesn't actually give you any advantage. You always want to be bringing it from closed side to open side. So go ahead and reset. So I'm still here, right? Now that one's a little bit scarier, but it is important that I'm pushing it out and away from me this way, because I'm going from closed to open. If I try to go from open to closed, I'm bringing it across. This is a lot safer. Now on this side, mind you, he has a better chance of trying to block the things along those lines, but at this point, I can ditch the stick and get this dagger in here. That's fine. So it's really not that bad. Now let's go ahead and switch sides. We'll show that again. So, Jake here is menacing me. I'm left foot forward. I open, step in, plant that dagger. Very simple. He thrusts from above. Open, dagger. Nothing too complicated. You could literally do this with any sort of stout stick that you found on the road, or your walking stick, or in my case, my now slightly shorter quarterstaff, because the end of it broke off. But, saves my bacon, use the dagger, everything's great. So let's go ahead and change the scenario. So, now, the next scenario we're going to cover is the idea of sword versus dagger. Now, we talked about sword versus dagger already, but this is going to be different context. So what's happening, as I grab my prop here, we have the sword sheathed. And also important to note is that the sword is not hanging. This is not a defense from the draw. This is a defense with the weapon as a whole when it is being held. So, pretty common, if you don't want to have the sword on you at all times, which, spoiler, that's really inconvenient. You see images of people just carrying it, or it's on their shoulder, or things along those lines. Basically, anything you can imagine someone doing with a sword when it's in a sheath, people will do. But a good at-rest position that we see a lot is just on the shoulder, something along those lines. Very good for travel, also good for conversation, or things along those lines. But either way, what's going to happen here is that Jake is going to attempt to kill me. So I have my sword on my shoulder, he feels relatively safe, he first takes a hold of me, because I've got that to deal with, that controlling arm is a big thing. If he just went straight for the stab, I have both arms free to defend myself. If he gets a hold of me, either my shirt or my hand or what have you, he's now locked out one side of my body, and the side that I could defend myself with, there's a sword in the way. So that's what he's looking to do. You want to reset? So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to ignore his grab. I'm going to take my right arm and I'm going to grab hold of the dagger, the sword, which is about to be a dagger, and I'm going to use this whole blade as it's sheathed to block his arm. So here's what that looks like. So he grabs me, and I'm going to push this out to defend myself. Now you can end up locked in a couple different places. In my case, I ended up locked a lot more on his hand because his hand was further back and I want to stop it before it comes forward. When we were rehearsing this, I actually ended up more on his elbow, which gives me a very, very good hold. The image itself shows more in the crux of his arm, which is also a great place. But regardless of where you hold it, once you've got that dagger kind of stopped for a second, keep it, pull the sword back, and just ram it home. Nice and hard as soon as you can. So we'll switch sides and we'll show that again as I explain it. So, sword's on my shoulder. Jake, I think, as my friend, is talking to me. Life is great, grand, and wonderful. Now he decides to get violent. Uh-oh, right? Defend yourself first by pushing this out here. Again, I caught the edge of that rondel. Good on me, right? Then draw while holding that pressure, and then drive it. And that is an important aspect of this draw that I want to talk about, is that I'm pushing my body out to create strength. This is the same way I would hold a spear. And then when I go to do this draw, I am not torquing. I'm holding it and leaning against it and pulling this back to me. I need to create and keep this shape if I want to hold him, because the second the blade goes away, this does get lighter. And if I let this turn or anything along those lines, I won't get the sword in place fast enough, because he's not going to see the sword. He's going to see my head. But either way, we'll go through that one more time a little more fluidly, and then we'll go ahead and move on to the next scenario. So I'm here, oh yes, things are great, everything's grand, and whenever he wants. Lock, draw, go. And then while Fiore doesn't necessarily describe a tornare, I'm going to do a tornare. It feels better, especially when Jake's meaty paw comes from my face. But let's now go ahead and escalate things to an even worse scenario, because that was pretty bad, but things do get worse. And for this, we'll need a couple more props. So Jake, who has proven himself not to be my friend recently, he's replaced Randy in the running for that, is going to now attack me from probably the worst situation I could be in. Now, what Fiore actually describes is if you're using a baton. A baton can be a lot of things, but in general what he's referencing is the sort of command baton. I'm using my billy club because that's the closest approximation I have. It would be sometimes even longer than this, sometimes with a swelled end, sometimes without. If you want to see an image of kind of what he's referring to, look up the woodcut of Sir John Hawkwood of the White Company. He's holding one, and that's a pretty good example. Fiore draws just a very simple, just basically dowel of wood about yay long, but it'll absolutely work. Now, the people that would be carrying this, you could have one in your civilian life, but more often he's referencing this to knights. So odds are you're carrying around your literal badge of office, and someone has taken issue with you, and you now need to use it to defend yourself. Now, this may all seem very niche and kind of ridiculous, but here's the fun fact about this. We actually have an instance of something like this happening. Not in Europe, though. Instead, it took place in Japan during the Sengoku Jidai. So, Usagi Kenshin managed to ride into Takeda Shingen's command tent on horseback and proceeded to attack his rival. Takeda Shingen, meanwhile, had to defend himself with, they call it a fan, but it's really more like a wooden baton that looks like a fan. He had to hold him off for a few minutes until his retainers could come and help. That is as close to this as we can get, and even then it was worse, right? Guy on horseback is way harder to deal with than dude with dagger. So my point is, you never know, and sometimes, especially back then, slightly ridiculous situations may make more sense than you expect. But in place of a lovely bench, I am sitting in the throne of Alabama, otherwise known as a plastic chair. So, Jake, who looks a heck of a lot taller now, can attack me from two different angles. He can attack from above with the ice pick grip, which is really going to suck, or he can attack from below with the sword grip, which is also going to suck. My block for these are going to be pretty straightforward. I'm going to place one hand on the other end and just catch him between. So I could have this baton, frankly, sitting however I want, but when he comes in with that attack, just put it between you and that dagger and really reach out. Now what Fiore then describes is after you've made the defense, get to your feet. Now that's the weird part. You could try and hop up into this, so go ahead and reset. If I see Jake coming from a longer way away, right, like he's, that's different. I could achieve this and then go. But the way Fiore describes it, probably I have to block, then stand. And the reason I'm drawing attention to this is because when this happens, I need to follow him. Okay, I've saved myself. He's going to start pulling back. I need to keep that block going, because off of this, I'm going to move into whatever I'm going to do, which he recommends a couple different things. The simplest one would be to release my left hand, grab hold of his wrist with an inverted hand, twist that down, and, well, set about town, right? I could go into throws. If I can pop the dagger out of his hand with that twist, I could also move into the choke that Fiore shows. There's a lot of fun options there, but it depends on whether or not I can strip that dagger. Now, this one is also quite funny, and you may have noticed it behind me. Fiore describes you can do this same guard with either a hood or a scarf. Now, when we say hood, what he's meaning is actually the hat that the drawing for this one is wearing, a chaperone, which is, in case you didn't know, it's a hood like this, rolled up and put on your head like a hat. Very, very fashionable. It can be presumed that you've taken your hood off, so your chaperone is just kind of sitting on your lap or things along those lines. I don't think you're whipping it off your head and then defending, but that would be pretty cool. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use it just like any sort of scarf defense. When Jake comes down from above, I'm just going to block that out by holding tension here and pushing it nice and high. Certainly, the closer to his hands you can get, the stronger this is going to be. The more slack, the more you're probably going to die while feeling quite silly. So here's that one again, just for funsies. This doesn't look good. Defend, he tries to pull back, follow, and then just grapple. Now, the next scenario in which we get is when he thrusts from below, and this is quite a fun one. So once again, here I am sitting. Jake is not my friend. Reach out. I like this one a little better, actually, because I can kind of hammer onto his forearm when I do it, which is great. Now, the danger with this one is that if Jake were smart, I'd recommend grabbing the top of my head and then shoving my face into that dagger, but we can presume that Jake is trying to get away from me, seeing as how his plan just went up in smoke. What I recommend from this one is, since he's going to be pulling back, keep your right hand on his hand as you hop to your feet, and then put your baton behind the knee, as Fiore shows in his earlier defenses. Now, we don't know whether or not Fiore means for these ones to be used in these situations, but out of his baton defenses, the choke feels better if you're up top and have stripped the dagger. This hook feels better if you're already in the low position. So we'll show that again. So I'm here, he comes in, block, follow, there's your throw. Nice and simple. Thank you very much, Jake. So, some wonderful flower battle weirdness for you all, but there really was no other good place to put those. Really, the only one we didn't cover is the two cudgels versus the spear. Spoiler, you block, well, you throw one cudgel, then you block with the other cudgel, then you stab him with your dagger. But that one just seemed a little bit too ridiculous for my liking. Either way, though, those are the niche defenses from Fiore's Flower of Battle. I hope you have enjoyed. They're all very interesting, and we'll be covering some other fights from history another time.